I'm Stephen Muker. I'm Director of Education Programs here at Berkeley Extension. I'm actually in Los Angeles today, and it's interesting to see several Angelinos here also, and individuals stretching from at least Maine to California, and probably some in between. So welcome. We appreciate having you here. Teaching across screens has always been intended as a workshop series by educators for educators. Small in nature, so it can be interactive. And I'm really excited today to have Kim Vinn and Gissela Moya to present for us their workshop, What the Digital Divide Means for the Classroom Teacher. So I'm going to briefly introduce them, but first I want to encourage you to sign up for our next workshop also. I was just telling Gissela and Kim that it really dovetails well with what their content is. James White will be joining us on November 17th at 4 p.m. for Reimagining Student Engagement when the Classroom is Closed. And I'm excited about his workshop, which really addresses some restorative practices used in classrooms to develop and encourage parents and students to develop their own contracts with each other about how they engage in their classroom. So I'm excited about that. He's joining us on the 17th again. Mark your calendar and join us on Eventbrite, 4 p.m. But today we have What the Digital Divide Means for the Classroom Teacher. Gissela Moya is the Tech Equity Policy Fellow at the Greenlighting Institute, and Kim Vinn is Program Director at Build Bay Area. There's more on the Eventbrite page if you want to learn more about their bio, but I'm just going to turn it right over to them and let them take us with their workshop. Go ahead.
Well, again, I want to thank everyone for coming to spend an hour with us this afternoon. I know many of you taught today, so I first want to invite you to take a deep breath in and let something go from the day. As you take another breath in, maybe start to pay attention to your neck or your shoulders or something that needs a little bit of movement. And exhale. And take one more breath in, and know that we are so grateful for you again, and we're excited for the conversation. We really hope it is a conversation and interactive as we spend an hour together today. And exhale, too. You're holding that in. So I first want to invite you to join us on Padlet by opening up the link dropped in the chat, or you can see up here the web address. Padlet is an online bulletin board where you can write a comment, you can add a picture or a link without a login. So we've been using it a lot in our classes. And the question we have for you today is, how is the digital divide evident in your classes? What are you seeing? That can be an anecdote about one student, it can be an estimate, an obstacle, a question you have that you're struggling with. And you can double click right on the main bulletin board in Padlet, or you can go down to the bottom right and use the pink plus in the circle to add a comment. And your specifics will help us today. We'll come back to it after we kind of talk big picture about the digital divide, but we really do want to know what you're seeing and what you are dealing with. Maybe it brought you here, but maybe it's an anecdote that you need to name for others. You could go there and add a few anecdotes. You can offer more than one.
I love the engagement already.
You can see on Padlet, you can also add a heart as a reaction. There are a few other reactions you can enable, and you can also add comments below, so you have a thread. And again, keep thinking about this as we begin our workshop, keep adding to it. We'll come back to it and then maybe address some of these issues that you're adding here. Again, you're welcome to keep adding, but we'll move on with introductions so that you know a little bit more about us and why we are here presenting to you on this topic. So first, here's Gissela.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you everybody who is already engaging. As Vincent mentioned, just from reading this, it's a little bit emotional. So my name is Salamoya. I am a UC Berkeley grad, as you can see from the campaign lily. Definitely I have a competition with Kim right now, since she went to Stanford. No, but my name is Salamoya. I'm Honduran. I came to this country when I was 12 years old. And for many years, I didn't have internet access at home. So when I was in 11th grade, my junior year of high school, the company that was providing us internet access went out of business. And because there was, because the building where we live lacked the internet infrastructure necessary for other providers to come in, then we were left without internet access for many years. And I went to community college before before transferring to UC Berkeley. And while this pandemic has really exacerbated the digital divide, it really has made me think about all those times where I thought that it was no one had a role in helping me, where school didn't have a role. I didn't know the government had a role. I just thought, here is a family, here's my family, we don't have internet access, and this is just the norm. So seeing how this conversation has shifted throughout the years has definitely been very touching for me, and I've learned a lot throughout the past years about what this looks like from the policy landscape. And although I was able to transfer and finally have internet access at home, this is still the reality of a lot of my family members. As you see on the right, I have a very big family. I have six nephews, and when you see my parents and even my grandma in there, and I have six nephews under 13 years old. And that pandemic has definitely been very chaotic at home. I have nephews that are either in high school or that are in elementary, and I was home for a while and I saw it firsthand, you know. So because the house or the apartment where my mom lives now still doesn't have internet, they usually have to go to my sister's house. And I kid you not, it's usually 8 kids in there since my mom is also a babysitter. So you'll have four children at the dining table, two in one room and two in another room. And it is very hard for them to concentrate, but also like for my mom as a caretaker, as an only Spanish language speaker, to help them as well with technology issues. So a lot of times I see that it's usually the elder nephews like helping the younger ones to stay connected, but also because sometimes they really just forget that they have to be logged in into their computer. And that is more on the personal side of why this issue matters a lot to me and why I really applaud all of the teachers who are here today, because I can see how hard you all try to ensure that students are engaged. And I'm also acknowledging that these are really hard times for teachers to teach and also for students to learn, especially as we're seeing the urgency of why we need to close the digital divide. And outside of my personal perspective of this issue, I am the Tech Equity Fellow at the Green Lining Institute, where I pretty much have been diving deep into the weeds of internet access and seeing it more from the regulatory framework or seeing more from what policy looks like. And it's been a really eye-opening process for me. I've had the opportunity to interview people from across the state, and that's why I'm super glad to be here to share a report that I co-authored back in June about this digital divide, but also to just give an overview of this issue. So I'll pass it down to Kim.
Thank you. I'm Kim Vinn. I come to you with experience as a high school English teacher. I taught at a public high school here in the San Francisco Bay Area for 12 years. Also been an instructor with the Stanford Teacher Education Program, working with pre-service teachers. And I currently work with an organization called Build that bridges communities between schools and the tech and entrepreneur and business communities here to offer students opportunities to succeed and grow. So in the bottom right, you'll see a graduating class of mine. I taught in a program called the Digital Arts Academy. And in the top photo, you'll see at the very end of the table, a couple of students that we brought to a tech company's boardroom to pitch their ideas. What I'll say about teaching and working in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley is that you would expect that we don't have issues with the digital divide. I mentioned that I taught in a program called the Digital Arts Academy. And yet these problems are still very, very prevalent here. I know we have participants today in our workshop who are coming from other places, but in a place like Silicon Valley, we very much are struggling with the digital divide, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it and what resources we need to attack the problem, and how we can think about the problem as more than just something that is about technology. And we'll get into that a little bit later. I do want to mention that in the bottom left photo, Gissela and I are in the same photo because we met as fellows with the Education Trust West, which is a nonprofit that advocates for educational justice and for the achievement of all California students, K-12 through college, particularly students of color and students living in poverty. Prior to that fellowship, I was a classroom teacher who thought I had a lot of experience and voice, and yet I didn't know how to get involved in advocacy or policy work. I felt really disconnected from education policy. As an instructor in a teacher preparation program, I was guiding students to get their credential with no foundation in education policy. So that organization gave us a grounding in ways into the work. And that's how we'll approach this topic today and share with you two main things as we move to this slide. Gissela will give you a chance to understand the extent of the digital divide and its origins, how they're really historical and structural, and that influences how we should think about this problem. And then I'll ask us to collectively rethink the role and tasks of the classroom teacher during distance learning. And to name why many of you may be here and how we might have to rethink it entirely, I offer this slide with a teacher's dilemma. As schools everywhere across the nation, even world, began this fall, many of us thought of this. How can we adjust classroom teaching to be accessible online and by phone and without a visual, because Chromebooks are freezing if students are trying to be on camera and attempt to look at something else, and asynchronously because of these new schedules that offer asynchronous and synchronous learning, and offline and online as well as in person simultaneously in a hybrid model. I want to acknowledge that if that feels impossible to you, I think it is, and I think it's the wrong question. So that means if you came here for the answer to it, we're not going to answer it, but we're going to kind of make you think of it differently and offer other things that we can do besides try to meet all of these conditions. Because again, I don't think it's possible for one teacher to do all of this. So we start there and ask you to think, instead of these things that are the first question to come to mind, what if we thought of it differently? Instead of this question that I've heard from so many teachers, how do we make students turn on their cameras? What if we took the cameras out of it and we said, what are the conditions under which students want to share more about themselves? And how can we get them to do that without thinking that turning on the camera is the only way? I've also heard, how do we get students to turn in work online? And I want to offer instead, how do we rethink schoolwork and homework and how to measure learning or just trust that it's happening? Lastly, this one, how do we get involved in the digital divide policy? We want to name that storytelling and your anecdotes and then your sharing of your experiences is a version of advocacy and a really important one. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it back to Gissela, who will give you an overview of internet access, and then we'll come back to those questions of the classroom teacher.
Thank you, Kim, especially for those questions. Yeah, definitely with the last question around it, there's been this big urgency of solving the digital divide, and especially who are the stakeholders and who decide the solutions for this. And there's been just a lot of emphasis on like, how do I, go get a law degree to fix this one and for all? And that's why we decided to offer instead, how do we see and relate education policy similar to internet policy? because there's an overlap. There's an overlap where storytelling, simply what you just shared with us, like in the Padlet, really like impacts advocates to to push us to do our work much faster. So definitely COVID-19 revealed to us that internet access is an essential service. And not just a simple and not just a simple essential service. And it's not enough to just have it. It's important that it's affordable, and it's important that it's fast. Many of you spoke about students being bumped out of Zoom classes, or the connectivity not being good enough. And that's what we mean, that we need now fast and reliable internet to really meet this moment that we're currently going through. And the digital divide didn't necessarily start this year. It has been here for many years. And oftentimes the urgency was really lacking. I personally, from an anecdotal perspective, I never heard till this year of schools going above and beyond to provide laptops and seeing themselves as part of the solution to this digital divide. And even just prior to the pandemic, there were already 12 million students who were already being affected by the homework gap, which is pretty much talking about the inability of students to complete their schoolwork due to lack of internet access. And we've been knowing that the students who are usually affected are usually the most marginalized. Black students, Latinx students, those living in rural communities, or even those coming from low income backgrounds. So we can see how this issue, and not just the pandemic, but even just the unemployment, has really impacted so many families who have to decide whether they pay for their internet bill, or they pay for rent, or they pay for food. Next slide. And when I'm talking about the digital divide, I'm talking about the inequality, between those who have it and those who don't. So this year, I had the opportunity to co-author a report about being on the wrong side of the digital divide, and I interviewed Fresno residents about their internet situation and found themes that are still so relevant today. For example, internet is too expensive for so many families. The affordability issue is honestly constantly here. And I've heard of so many families going into debt to pay for their internet bill. For example, there was this family that was telling me how they were $600 into debt because although they were paying their internet bill, they didn't necessarily afford it. And these are families that are on less than $2,000 income, paying more than 10% of their of their monthly income to go to the internet. For many, internet is too slow, especially for families and students that are under low cost essential plans. We've seen how private companies and even government have been pushing for essential plans to solve it. That if you just give someone a $10 plan, that will just solve this digital divide. But from what I've heard and from what I've seen from families is that it's just simply very inadequate. It's too slow. A lot of the times it comes with data caps, and it just doesn't do enough justice for families of four, for families that need to be connected on their Zoom while they're doing work, while another child is in their classroom. And this really places many schools and students at a disadvantage, because as we have transitioned to online learning, many wealthier, wider schools that were already doing before have actually seen higher attendance rates as we have transitioned online, while schools from majority low income backgrounds are actually seeing lower attendance rates. Next slide. And at the end of the day, we're really talking about this underlying issue, that the digital divide is really a symptom of the historical injustices that the United States has done, especially around housing, around education policy. And it's one of the reasons why we still see that impacts today, and why this issue, more than just about who has it, it's like who racially has it and who doesn't. Next slide. So from the report that I mentioned earlier, we looked at patterns of internet access and saw that when you compare the maps of redlining from the 30s, redlining the private practice of denying lending and investment to neighborhoods of color, they look awfully similar to the maps of Oakland, California now the maps that tell you where adoption rates are high and where they're low. So if you look on the left, the red areas look very similar to the red areas from who has high adoption rates, who has high and fast internet speeds, and who can actually afford it. And when you look at the green, you see the areas that historically have had the advantage, while those from predominantly low income areas are left in the dust. And although this is about Oakland, this redlining and the impacts of redlining is something that can be seen across California and across the country. And this lack of investment still continues on today in communities of color. There's studies that have come out of UC Berkeley about AT&T's lack of investment in of broadband of internet in low income neighborhoods while they prioritize richer areas to deploy their faster fiber speeds. Next slide. And all of that lack of investments, historical redlining really leaves us here at this moment where more than 20,000 teachers lack adequate access to internet to teach. And that is just simply unacceptable. Our teachers, similar to our students, like deserve to have all the tools necessary to succeed and to ensure that their students succeed right now. And as I mentioned, like this is more than about the digital divide. This is about who has the opportunity to succeed in the economic opportunities to keep on progressing. Because when a student doesn't submit an application to apply for college due to lack of internet access, that is someone we're losing. That is someone's future that we're putting on hold. That is someone's future that really is being decided by something that shouldn't. And this is where I believe like storytelling can be super important, especially as we know that more than 60% of the students who lack adequate access in California are Black, Latinx, or Native American. And this is where storytelling is super important because we need to tell advocates and decision makers that no, we know we can no longer continue leaving those marginalized behind. This is something that no one deserves, and this is why we need to center in who is getting impacted by this, because in a way this is how we expand the opportunities, because as we close the digital divide, we're also expanding opportunities for students to succeed. And lastly, on this part, I would just like to just give a brief update of what's going on just locally and across the state. So locally, if you live in the Bay Area, maybe you have come across the Oakland Undivided campaign, which aims to ensure that Oakland students have three things: a computer, internet connection, and technology support in their home, which is really important because as we will learn today, with even more with Kim, is that the digital divide is one part of this issue, but the engagement part and the digital literacy component of this is just as important. And just as this new fall semester started, many schools apply for funding from the government, and through Governor Gavin Newsom, more than $5.3 billion in funds were distributed across multiple schools to support learning during the pandemic. And the good thing about the way they distributed this is that they over 81% of the funds that were distributed were prioritizing students with the greatest needs, English learners, low income students, and that is really important because as we have learned, doesn't affect everybody the same. But even though there's money being poured into this issue, there's still a backlog that many schools are still experiencing because shipment issues and they haven't received the computers to distribute it to the students. So like there's still to this day a lot of students waiting who didn't start this fall semester on the right foot. And Governor Gavin Newsom has also like executed an order pretty much pushing the pushing state agencies across government to bridge the digital divide. So there's currently a rulemaking process happening at the California Public Utilities Commission that is looking at strategies and strategies that they can deploy in the next 12 to 18 months to expedite the deployment of fast, reliable, and affordable internet. And lastly, I would like to end this slide with this, with California Emergency Technology Fund. So each year they do a survey that track progress of broadband deployment and adoption throughout California. And one of my colleagues actually brought this to my attention that overall the digital divide is getting, it's closing. More people are connected, and although sometimes people are connected through the internet, through a phone versus a laptop, overall, like, more people are getting connected. But something that was really interesting is that from the households that have children, usually they're more likely to be connected than households that don't have children because of school policies, especially school policies that are lending students the computers, or are providing students the computers that they can take home. And this is something that makes me hopeful for this year, to see that hopefully we are closing it dramatically this year. And although we're focusing on students right now and on teachers, this goes beyond. This goes beyond students. Like, there's still like so many elders as well who need computer services, like to access telehealth, and those are issues that we're gonna continue seeing. And now I'm going to pass it on to Kim to really just take us through this other side, that once we have the computer, it's not enough. As we've learned, we also need to make sure that we are engaged across the screens.
Thank you. So while these are some things that you can follow for updates and make sure that your school policies are addressing the digital divide, we want to next think about your experience and the impact on students. On the left, you'll see a photo that went viral on Twitter, and it's a photo of two students who are accessing their coursework through computers, but in the parking lot of a Taco Bell. And this is in Salinas, California, in Monterey County, again, about 45 minutes south of Silicon Valley. So underscoring the point that our students need access, even in areas like the California Bay Area. This really went viral and sparked a lot of conversations. And I can't tell you enough how important these conversations are. We also know that student testimonials and teacher educator testimonials are so important for others to hear. I want to call out Vincent's comment in the chat box that says, I work in the tech policy space, and reading these stories is so helpful and heartbreaking. But for students to name that their coursework and their passions in school are impacted because they're working on phones, their college applications are impacted. I think the collective, the range of experiences that we collect are really useful, and we'll share a site and a campaign later on that collects these and really shows you the impact on our students, both in elementary grades as well as up through college. But I want to use this slide to expand this as an issue of equity generally. I don't think it's just an issue of technology, and I don't just think that throwing hotspots and Chromebooks at students will solve this. So seeing this slide and then expanding our definition helps us address the topic from different angles. We know that technology is a main conversation among schools. Do we have enough Chromebooks to distribute? Do we have hotspots? Are schools set up for students to come if they need to access Wi-Fi? But we know that connectivity then also depends on time and space. We know that students are accessing their coursework in bedrooms that are shared. As Gissela said, 4 students in one room, 2 in another. And then there's also space and time. So what that means is, are we as educators talking to students about the time and space that they need to create in order to be fully present at school? We can't just say, do you have a computer? Okay, you should be good. But instead, do you have the time and space? Can you carve it out? Can we talk about it and troubleshoot and problem solve? On the right, I do also want to add in ability to focus. Are we acknowledging that in a time of great unemployment and job loss, many of our students' priorities are different because they're either taking care of siblings or joining the workforce to support their families and their family income? I have seniors who are calling into Zoom classes from work. And are we talking about that both with our colleagues at school and administrators, as well as with the general public, who again are saying, can we get computers for the students who need them? Health and wellness, we know, is an issue, as anxiety about students' health, family health, grandparents is high in this coronavirus pandemic. And wellness, which includes being able to have strong relationships, which sometimes happen at school with teachers and amongst classmates. I also want to name that privacy is an issue that's related to all of this. For a lot of our students, we are glad that school is that safe space where they can explore identities, whether it is a racial identity or about sexual orientation. And many of them now at home amongst family may not be as willing to disclose or explore their identities, and privacy concerns show up as well, which all inhibit students' ability to be present in school. So as we talk about this, let's expand it, because our addressal of health and wellness and student time and space and privacy all feeds into this conversation. So I want to come back to our Padlet, and I'll pull over the one with your answers. Because while you may have initially thought about tech support for teachers, access to tech, Zoom, remote learning here, I'll ask that you add anything that hits at these two topics as well, issues of access or ability to focus. Because our conversation, again, has to be multifaceted, and schools can address this, outside resources can address this, government policy can address this. But again, it shouldn't just be one thing that we're pushing for. My last offer of reframing before I put you in small groups to keep talking about these is that we're now guests in students' homes. Oftentimes teachers have to implement school policy, school rules. But now if we consider ourselves guests in students' homes, how does that change our role as teachers? And again, instead of thinking of all the things we have to do, can we think of what can we do now that we couldn't before? So I'm going to put you in small breakout groups so that you get to chat with our fellow participants here. Pick an example from the Padlet and discuss it. Maybe you reframe the issue, you ask a bigger or a different question. You offer a solution that isn't the first or the easiest or the quickest, but you'll get a chance to chat with others about what's pressing and how do we address this from multiple angles. So I will assign you to breakout rooms randomly, and you'll have 3 or 4 participants per room, and bring you back in about 10 to 12 minutes.
Yeah, we're back. This is a new screen. I didn't see the screen.
Okay. I know that it's not enough time. I know that it is really important for many of you to hear what others are dealing with so that you sort of, again, see and hear the range and some solutions. I heard in one room that connection looks different, and that in another room, family and parent outreach and education is really important. I want to remind you that you have such control over those things and they matter. And then I want to come back to our stories and where we can share them and how storytelling can be advocacy.
Yeah, and as we are gearing up towards the end, we'll just like to mention of other opportunities. So if you really want to get more into the weeds of internet policy and seeing how to solve this digital divide, you can honestly reach out to the Green Learning Institute and our tech team, and we can work with you the reality is that with all of these proceedings and all this policy making, oftentimes teachers' voices are not there. And one way that you can make sure that your input is there, just from the conversation that I was having with Sarah, I was learning a lot. In this is the reality that a lot of the times those who are in policy making have not been teachers themselves. So this is where your input is super important. But also, as we've been mentioning throughout, like the way that you've been raising your stories is really important to humanize this issue and how it goes beyond connecting a student with a device. So you can also like continue sharing the stories through Common Sense Media's campaign about connecting all students, and we'll share the links with you as well. Oh, actually, Kim just shared it. And you can also like go into that link and see what other teachers are saying across the country, what other parents, what other students are saying. And if you want to also like learn the statistics of how many teachers are unconnected in your state, then you can find it there as well.
Are those all teachers of public institutions or also private? Is it a cross section of teachers from different
I would have to get back to
spheres?
you on that, but it looked like they were just gathering private and public voices. I
Okay.
didn't see that emphasis on public or private in the website. Next slide. Mm-hmm. Actually.
Really quickly, can you see the Common Sense Media website?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is the most comprehensive campaign that I've seen that includes a lot of these educator voices that you'll see up here, and that is pushing for lawmakers to close the digital divide. So here it says, share your story with us. And again, I think this is one of the largest nationwide campaigns, and you can see statistics by state. I think it is both public and private school stories, but then this site here offers resources by region, states, and school districts, and then a couple of other resources that we really liked as we were researching and figuring out ways in for educators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, next slide. And I'll just end it with this example in terms of like how the California Utilities Commission approaches these issues and the types of questions. Like one of the questions is, how should the commission use the roughly 1 million in the digital divide account to help schools and students? This is where you can really either work with the Green Learning Institute or with other organizations to bring out the best ideas, because at this point we need them all.
We have just 5 minutes left. I'll offer this time for questions. And then also, if you want to share anything out from your breakout groups that was insightful, this is also a space for that. So not just questions, but something maybe a partner said that was helpful or helped you rethink of this issue.
Yes, ladies. Hi, my name is Cesar Guillen. I'm a teacher in Union City at James Logan High School. My question is, I actually want to share this with my administrators, especially with my special ed admin, because we're really having issues bridging their concepts of what it takes to have functional technology for students with severe needs. So my question is there a way to, number one, get this presentation from you and then establish another bridge of communication with you? Because I really think what you're doing is very powerful. And again, Union City needs it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. And yes, of course, we can share this presentation with you and continue having this conversation and see where there's more opportunity to, to like either explain to your supervisors or anyone else that needs to be pressed in this issue, for sure.
It's more of an education, Miss Gissela.
Okay.
So we're going to have to educate people.
Okay.
But thank you again, ladies. This is very powerful. Thank you.
Yeah, one thing that I think he mentioned in the breakout room is that just lingered with me was that within this division, there's further divisions, especially with people who have disabilities. So it's not just one division. Now with this division that you've brought up, there's just, it seems like there's more domino effect. There's a chasm. There's more and more that is just, this is like a just the surface.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that. And definitely, I definitely think that even without, we forget that even like language barriers, as many teachers like are literally trying to teach right now, when there's no translation, like everything is just
Me lo
really hard.
dices o me lo cuentas? Having to teach both in English and in Spanish,
Sí,
special
las
ed,
dos.
oh yeah, ahí estoy.
Mhm.
And 10 years in, it's not easy.
Oh, thank you for that work. Anyone else before we close up?
Is there, this is Paul in Oregon. Is there a way to see the prior workshops that Teaching Across Screens did, like last May, zooming in and zooming out?
Hi, Paul. This is Stephen Muker, UC Berkeley. I just the last link there on the chat is
Great.
the
Thank you.
blog where that is, and you'll see this workshop in about a week once this goes through some post-production.
This is really cool, being able to connect to people.
Glad to have you.
Thank you so much. We're so excited about the turnout from Oregon to Maine to DC to LA, and a few of us here in the Bay Area.
Yes.
Do you want to add one more question?
No, I just said from New York too.
Oh, New
And New
York.
York.
Okay. We have all of the United States here.
Let's go Dodgers.
Yes.
Stephen is threatening to kick us off so he can watch the Dodger game.
I was trying to not be Bay Area centric, but yeah, I'll be looking for that. But this was great. Thank you so much for joining us. We do hope many of you will come in November to that workshop. We appreciate you attending all of these, and thank you to Gissela and Kim for such an excellent workshop. And a lot of appreciation for all of you out there. It's clear with each of these workshops that you're doing important, difficult work, and we hope you feel appreciated for that and all the adjustments that you're making, and hope that you're taking care of yourself. So thanks again for joining us.